a healthy environment. My name is Philippa Jacob, and I'm the Research Officer working on the ACT Human Rights Commission review of the right to a healthy environment. We're very pleased you're able to join us from what I hope is the comfort of your own home. To begin, I invite Dr Pene Mathew to offer an acknowledgement of country in the Ngunnawal language.
Yuma everyone. Daura Nuna, Daura Ngunnawal, Yangu Nalamanyan Dunimanyan, Ngunnawal Wari, Daura Wari, Indi Wangeralijin Yin. And that is Ngunnawal, for this is Ngunnawal country. Today we are all meeting on Ngunnawal country and we acknowledge and pay our respects to the elders. I'd like to extend that respect to any Aboriginal people who are joining us this evening. I do know that there are a few as well, and acknowledge other Aboriginal people with connections to the ACT. And just noting for our admin that some people are saying they are not getting the sound, but other participants are saying they are getting the sound fine. Hopefully that's all being sorted out. All right.
Thank you, Penny, for that acknowledgement. And I just wanted to share with everyone that as part of the research I've done for this review so far, one thing I've learned from the First Nations people I've spoken to, that there's this foundational understanding that if you look after country, country will look after you. I too am grateful to the traditional owners for the way this country is cared for. This unceded land, this bush capital, it gives us, there's so much beauty. It's a sanctuary for mental health. I hope every non-Indigenous person listening can find at least one way tonight to walk more gently on country. Some admin before we get into the swing of things. There is a chat function that has been enabled for tonight. I can see a number of you have already found it. If you cannot see it, look to the bottom right-hand corner of this WebEx screen and click on the button with the little speech bubble. That should bring up the chat function for you. Please feel free to leave comments and questions. We encourage robust discussion, but we do remind everyone to please make sure all comments are polite and respectful. We will have a small amount of questions and answers at the end of the presentation tonight. We will try and get to as many questions as we can, but if we run out of time, we will answer any outstanding questions by way of a FAQ resource or other method, which will be available on our website at hrc.act.gov.au, and will also be emailed out to those who consented to receiving updates. We will also be running some Slido polls throughout the presentation. If you would like to participate in the polls, you can join Slido by scanning this QR code you can see on your screen now, if you have a smartphone, or you can also choose to join if you go to the webpage slido.com. If choosing to join via the website, take note of the participant code and passcode, which will pop up every time we have a Slido. You'll see on this slide, the website has a blue bar where you enter the participant code. It'll take you to a new screen where you enter the passcode. As I mentioned, these two options will be visible on the left-hand side of the screen every time a new poll pops up. So please do not worry if you need slightly more time to join. We also note there is absolutely no obligation to participate if you don't want to. The right to a healthy environment underpins all other human rights. There are some connections that seem straightforward, the right to life, the right to health, but the right to a healthy environment also underpins many others, including, for example, the right to privacy. The right to privacy includes the right to enjoy your own home. And as temperatures get hotter, without a healthy environment, it may be more difficult to keep our homes cool in summer and warm in winter. Without a healthy environment, many people will have their right to work impacted due to the extreme temperatures or even loss of the environment in which they employ their business or trade. We hope you can take away something today to learn more about how all those human rights are interconnected. The agenda for tonight will include an overview of our review into the right to a healthy environment, including an explanation of the scope of this right. We will then move on to a topic about communication of air quality in Canberra. The third session for the night will focus on wood heaters and public health, and the final topic for the night will be a discussion on the ways the ACT government is planning to reduce emissions from transport. You'll see we've already got our first Slido poll going for the night. Please let us know where you're joining us from. As those results start to roll in, I would like to introduce our speakers. Our first speaker for tonight is Dr Pene Mathew. She is President and Human Rights Commissioner at the ACT Human Rights Commission. Specialising in international law and politics, she holds degrees from the University of Melbourne and Columbia Law School. Pene is an expert on international refugee law, has worked as a human rights lawyer, and published extensively in this field. Pene has had many prestigious appointments, including Dean at Auckland Law School, Dean and Head of Griffith Law School, and academic roles at the University of Melbourne, the Australian National University, Michigan Law School, and Griffith University. We're also having presentations today from two other speakers who we are very privileged that they are joining us. Professor Sotiris Vardoulakis is Professor of Environmental Public Health, Director of the NHMRC Healthy Environments and Lives National Research Network, and of the Health Research Institute at the University of Canberra. Previously, he was the inaugural Professor of Global Environmental Health at the Australian National University, Director of Research at the Institute of Occupational Medicine in Edinburgh, and Head of the Environmental Change Department and of the Air Pollution and Climate Change Groups at Public Health England. For more than 25 years, Sotiris has advised national and local governments and international organisations such as the World Health Organization and the United Nations Environment Programme on topics like climate change, air pollution, health impact analysis, risk communication, and health protection. He was a coordinating lead author of the UNEP, United Nations Environmental Programme, Global Environmental Outlook, GO7. His current work includes coordinating nationally significant projects on bushfires, air pollution, extreme heat, clean energy, sustainable cities, and climate resilience, and providing expert input to Australia's national health and climate strategy, national climate risk assessment, and multiple parliamentary and government inquiries. Our third speaker for tonight is Dr. Sharon Campbell. She's a postdoctoral research fellow at the Menzies Institute for Medical Research at the University of Tasmania. Specialising in the human health impacts of climate change, her main research interests include climate-related extreme events such as heat waves, bushfires, and poor air quality, and the impact of these events on healthcare systems, communities, and priority populations. Through her keen understanding of air quality, Sharon also has a strong research interest in the health impacts of wood heater emissions. With a background in public health policy, Sharon concentrates on the translation of research into policy and practice, emphasising the communication of research and public education. Awesome. Now let's have a quick look at the results from this first poll. We can see there is a significant turnout from Tuggeranong. Come on, Northside, let's pick up the game. It looks like we have a very good widespread representation from across ACT. And we also have people who are joining us from outside the ACT. So an extra warm welcome to you. We're glad this online format means you can be here. I will now hand over to Pene to start the presentations and talk about the Human Rights Commission review of the right to a healthy environment.
Thank you, Philippa. And thank you everyone for choosing to spend your Tuesday evening or part of it with us. As Philippa has explained, we're going to talk about the clean air as a part of the right to a healthy environment. The right to a healthy environment is a relatively new addition to the ACT's Human Rights Act. The right became law on 17 March 2025. And the ACT is to be commended for adding this important right to the Human Rights Act and demonstrating a commitment to combating the triple planetary crisis of climate change, biodiversity loss, and pollution. Under the Human Rights Act, the Human Rights Commissioner has the power to review the effect of ACT laws on human rights. And I've decided to use that review power to examine the effect of ACT laws on the right to a healthy environment. In the review, the Commission will make both commendations, that is, congratulations, well done, and recommendations, i.e. here's what you might do next for government. We also hope to encourage a public discussion about the responsibilities that all of us have with respect to this right. In the spirit of empowering people to take action where they can, we're considering recommendations for individuals within the ACT. This is consistent with the nature of the right to a healthy environment as not just an individual right, but a solidarity right that requires action at the level of the individual, community, state, and globally. It's also consistent with the general environmental duty under the Environment Protection Act, which requires individuals to conduct their activities so as not to cause environmental nuisance. My sense is that ACT residents will take these recommendations in the spirit of solidarity. I think we're all committed to maintaining and improving our bush capital, but we need to continue to move from knowledge to action, and that requires change in the way we do things. So what does the right to a healthy environment mean? What's its content? Linkages between human rights and the environment have been recognised as far back as the 1972 UN conference at Stockholm on the human environment. More recently, the right to a healthy environment has been recognised as a standalone human right. And you might have followed some of the developments in international courts, like the International Court of Justice's advisory opinion on obligations of states with respect to climate change. And you'll know that these judgments have all come down just in the last couple of years. So the right is still evolving. The ACT government has sensibly drawn on what a UN expert on this subject, the United Nations Special Rapporteur on the human right to a clean, healthy and sustainable environment, has said about the content of the right. That expert has said the right to a healthy environment has 9 elements, 6 of them relating to the substance or content of a healthy environment. So these are called the substantive elements, and 3 of which are about process. So these are called procedural elements. So if we can look at the next slide, you can see the 6 substantive elements there. They're a right to a non-toxic environment, right to clean air, which we're discussing tonight, right to a safe climate, to healthy ecosystems and biodiversity, right to safe and sufficient water, right to healthy and sustainable food. And then on the other side, there are the procedural elements, the right to seek, receive and impart information, the right to participate in environmental decision-making, and the right to effective justice and remedy. The right to a healthy environment, as Philippa has already acknowledged tonight, will also interact with the cultural rights of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples, which are enshrined in Section 27(2) of the Human Rights Act. As Philippa has said, for Aboriginal people, if people look after country, country will care for people. And the Commission is interested in exploring that relationship more closely in a future review. Our current focus is a review and report on the substantive element of clean air, meaning outdoor or ambient air quality. Now, of course, the air in the ACT is generally of good quality, but there are factors that can significantly impact on air quality. The 2020 fires had such a detrimental effect that for a short time, Canberra had the worst air quality in the world. The risk of polluted air to human health is significant. The World Health Organization has reported that high concentrations of major pollutants are associated with respiratory problems, such as asthma, and are a risk for heart disease, stroke, and cancer, amongst other concerns. With respect to the 2020 fires, the ACT's Chief Health Officer reported a 52% increase in hospitalisation for respiratory events. We're talking about things like severe asthma attacks or severe irritation of the throat and lungs and difficulties breathing. So that all happened during 5 to 11 January 2020. The right to a healthy environment imposes obligations on government. The ACT has accepted that it has an obligation to progressively achieve better air quality and that it must act in accordance with the precautionary principle. And I'll take a moment to explain those two concepts. The precautionary principle requires the government not to delay measures to prevent environmental harm on the basis of lack of full scientific certainty, especially if the harm may cause serious or irreversible damage. It's well accepted in international environmental law and is now accepted as part of human rights law. The obligation of progressive achievement is part of human rights law, particularly economic, social, and cultural rights. It essentially requires government to make continuous improvements. It's relevant to the right to a healthy environment because that right is contained in the section of the Human Rights Act devoted to economic, social, and cultural rights. And I'm going to take a step back to just explain this language. So if we move to the next slide, economic, social, and cultural rights are contained in a UN treaty or an agreement between countries or nation states. They include rights like education, work, housing, and health, and they enable the full participation of citizens in society. And it's pretty obvious that they're going to take some resourcing to fulfil them. The other rights, traditional civil liberties, things like freedom of expression, assembly and association, the right to a fair trial for an accused, the right to vote, are contained in a different treaty, the International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights. And because those rights are traditionally thought of as negative rights requiring government not to interfere with citizens, that treaty imposes obligations to respect and ensure the rights. Whereas when you look at the International Covenant on Economic, Social and Cultural Rights, it talks about an obligation to take steps using maximum available resources to progressively achieve the right. Now, in fact, the differences between these two sets of rights are really a bit overblown. It would be very concerning if the obligation of progressive achievement meant that governments could simply say, I don't have the resources to achieve these rights. The committee that supervises the Covenant on Economic, Social and Cultural Rights has made it very clear that there's a minimum core obligation of all socio-economic rights that must be met. And frankly, in the context of the environment, I think it's actually useful to focus on the obligation of progressive achievement because it tells governments that they must be continuously working on improving the environment. The committee that supervises the treaty has also said that retrogressive or backward steps should not be taken, and that's also helpful for those concerned to protect the environment. All right, well, let's move then from that introduction to consider some of the topics that the Commission has been grappling with in the course of this review. And we're going to focus tonight on communication of air quality, then turn to wood-burning heaters, and then finally to traffic exhaust or fumes. So let's talk about air quality. And I think we've got another Slido poll coming up if we can move to the next slide. So how often do you check air quality ratings? And we don't care what source you're using, whether you're using the government website or you're using an air quality app or a sensor at home or some other source. While people are engaging with that poll, and hopefully, yes, I can see there are a few who are engaging with that poll, I want to explain who does what in relation to air quality. So there are national air quality standards that the ACT must report on annually. The Environment Protection Authority that sits in the City and Environment Directorate publishes that report. The National Environment Protection Measure Ambient Air Quality Measure sets national standards for 6 key pollutants, 2 of which are not measured in the ACT for good reason. And the 4 pollutants measured in the ACT are carbon monoxide, ozone, nitrogen dioxide, and particulate matter. That is very small particles of matter in the air. Now, small is not good in this instance. It means these particles pass through your nose, can enter into the bloodstream and cause, for example, coronary artery disease, which is when your arteries are clogged with plaque, restricting blood flow and oxygen to the heart, thus causing heart attack. There are two kinds of particles that need to be measured, PM2.5 and PM10. PM10 is called coarse particulate matter. It's the product of dust in some industries such as mining. It's very small, even though it's labelled coarse, which sounds like it's large and rough. So the 10 in PM10 refers to 10 micrometers or microns, which is finer than a strand of human hair. PM2.5 obviously is even tinier, and it's labelled fine particulate matter, and it's caused by smoke, for example. And if you were here during the 2020 bushfires, you'd be pretty familiar with those particles and strategies to avoid inhaling them, including P2 masks. Okay, so just looking at how often people engage with the air quality ratings, there's a fair few of you, over 20%, who engage with them every single day. And then the next, an equal number saying that you often engage with them, and probably an equal number saying just only during bushfires. 4% say they never engage with it. So that's very interesting information for us to know. All right. So let's think then about how the ACT government communicates air quality. So air quality is monitored by the Health and Community Services Directorate, and the ACT has 3 monitoring stations at Monash, Flory and Civic. Continuous readings are taken for each pollutant at all monitoring stations 365 days a year, subject to maintenance and the occasional instrument fault. One of the procedural elements, as you'll remember, of the right to a healthy environment is the obligation to provide timely and accessible environmental information that's comprehensive and effective. So reporting on this data assists the ACT to meet its obligations under the right to a healthy environment. So looking at this slide, these are the ACT quality readings from earlier today. The air quality at each monitoring station is displayed using a colour code, so green for good, yellow for fair, and we don't have any brown today indicating extremely poor air quality. You'll note that the air quality in Civic was only fair today. The same information is also communicated using a map of the ACT, as you can see on this next slide. The information is updated every hour, and the data collected by government is also used on mobile phone apps like AirRater and AirSmart to provide the same information, and you can set up those apps to push notifications to you. We think the ACT government is to be commended on making the information it collects publicly available and user-friendly, but we want to know what you think. So pop in the chat if the way this information is displayed makes sense to you. And I can see a question there from Daryl. I think we took these measurements at 12 today, but I'm not quite sure. Philippa might answer that question later. Okay, so next slide. So we've only got 3 of the monitoring stations, and we want to know if you're not living in a suburb with an air quality monitoring station, what concerns does this raise for you? And if you happen to live in a place that does have a monitoring station, please feel free to talk about what you think broader community concerns might be. Keep your answers short, but you can submit multiple answers if you would like. I'm going to give you a few suggestions to answer that question, and that is, without a comprehensive air quality monitoring network, it can be difficult to demonstrate variations in air quality between neighbourhoods that don't have accurate air quality monitoring. This leads to an inequity in access to information, and the ACT potentially lacks a sound basis for decision making for the entire community. Additionally, someone who has a health condition like asthma who lives in, say, Gungahlin or Western Creek cannot always rely on the air quality information to adequately protect their health. Okay, so we've got some people answering the Slido poll. So some are saying they use purple air readings that are more comprehensive in terms of the area covered. And people noting that their concerns that you can't protect your own health and the government doesn't really know what's going on if they don't have a more extensive monitoring network. There are probably still some people typing up some answers, and we'll save all of those and take that into account as we write our report. There have been several recent air quality assessments that recommend installation of additional monitoring stations, mentioning locations including Woden Valley, Molonglo Valley, Gungahlin, and the Western Edge investigation area, primarily the district of Stromlo. Okay, so people still typing away. As they do that, I think we're going to now hand over, though, to our other speakers, and we're going to have more of a discussion around wood heater smoke. So I'm going to hand over to Sotiris and Sharon, and Jenny, we will stop sharing our screen now so that Sharon and Sotiris can share theirs.
Fantastic. Thank you so much. I'm learning quite a lot about human rights and the environment as we go here as well. So hopefully I can teach everyone here something a little bit more about air quality, especially with relation to wood heaters. My name's Dr. Sharon Campbell. Thanks for your lovely introduction, Penny. Sotiris Vardoulakis here with me as well. I'm going to start off talking first, so I get to do the first round. I'm going to talk quite broadly about wood heater research around Australia, and then I'll hand over to Professor Vardoulakis to talk more on the ACT. I'm actually based in Hobart in Tasmania, so a little bit of a different perspective. And Professor Vardoulakis is based in Canberra, so he has a much more local knowledge there. So I will go ahead and share my screen. And hopefully this works. Fantastic. Someone, Penny, if you can give me a nod. We're lovely. Excellent. Okay, thanks. So we've already seen a lovely, now, sorry, let me just make sure that, can you see the presenter view or can you see?
No, we can see the slides on the side.
Oh, fantastic. Okay, good.
So yeah, can you change to presenter view? So we can see the slides. Yeah.
Gosh. Let me just stop sharing and start sharing again. That's probably easier.
Yeah. If you've got it in presenter view, you want to make sure you select.
Okay.
Excellent.
Great. Sorry about that. Okie dokie. So what we're going to run through today is just the overall looking at some of the bigger picture with wood heater research in Australia, and then I'll pass on to Sotiris. Penny's also done a lovely acknowledgement. So again, I feel really welcomed, and I would like to pay my respects individually to elders past and present, and also anyone who is from First Nations countries in the audience today. Just a little bit about the two organisations that Sotiris and I are representing today. We have our own institutions, but then we're also very closely aligned with the HEAL Research Network and also the Centre for Safe Air. This is an amazing map of the reach and the impact of the HEAL Global Research Network. It's represented by different themes that cut across multiple areas of the environmental health landscape. and also individual hubs. So I'm actually with the Tasmanian hub and Sotiris with the ACT hub, but we have amazing researchers right around the country and a huge network of researchers that we can draw on. There's over 40 institutions and 100 different researchers in the network. We're both also aligned with the Centre for Safe Air. Anyone who's interested in this topic, I'd really love to invite you to visit the HEAL network and also the Centre for Safe Air to find out a little bit more about what we do. The Centre for Safe Air is an NHMRC Centre of Research Excellence, specifically in air quality, and our 3 areas of research are around buildings, transport, and climate change. Okay, so Penny has touched on a few of these issues about the health impacts of smoke from wood heaters, and it really is a systematic impact. It's not, most people will go, oh, I might cough or my eyes might sting if I'm impacted or exposed to a lot of smoke. But it's actually doing damage right across your system. It's because those PM particles are so tiny that Penny mentioned. They actually go into your lungs, can enter into your bloodstream, and then flow right around your body. And that's why we get these impacts right around our whole body. So when we look at the research, we can see that these particles are associated, unfortunately, with deaths, with increased hospital admissions, with increased emergency department visits, with increased medication use, with increased GP visits. All of these things have a really high burden on medical systems, which are usually already incredibly stretched, especially at times of extreme smoke events like the ACT had in early 2020. It's also specific people that are highly at risk. And so these are people that tend to be already at risk of lots of other things, or have what we might call more vulnerable people or susceptible people or priority populations. These are all words that are used in this context. So these are people that already have medical conditions like heart disease and lung disease. They tend to be older. So, generally we talk about elderly people being more at risk when there's smoke exposed. Also young children, women who are pregnant. So there's quite a big group of the general population that actually are at higher risk of poor health outcomes when they're exposed to particulate matter. In terms of the burden of wood heater smoke, I'm looking at Sydney at the moment, and Sydney's a really interesting case study. And as I said, Sotiris is going to talk a lot more about what's happening in Canberra. But in Sydney, only 10% of households actually own a wood heater. And you can see from that chart on the right-hand side that that darker blue is actually responsible for monthly particulate matter emissions in the Sydney Basin. And you can see that in those winter months, that wood heaters have such a high burden of emissions compared to industrial emissions, traffic emissions. Under that sort of mid-blue colour, you can see that's a little bit higher in the summer months because that's coming from bushfires and planned burns, those sorts of things. So even with the bushfires, excluding the 2020 event, which was so extreme, but with the risk of bushfires in summer months, you can see that the wood heater PM2.5 burden is so much larger in the winter months. And it really only comes from 10% of households, which is pretty insane. In terms of actually man-made or anthropogenic sources of particulate matter, wood heaters outstrip everything else. And so you can see from this work again done in Sydney, in the Greater Metropolitan Region of Sydney, about 24% of the PM concentration actually comes from wood heaters. And that's taking into account lots of other sources. It doesn't take bushfires into account. They're not classified as man-made. But you can see industrial vehicles, shipping, aircraft, all those other things pale in comparison compared to the 24% that wood heaters actually contribute. So it's a really significant source, and I'm really glad that we're talking about this tonight. Again, looking right around Australia, this was some work that was done by Nico Butcher-Zaragata, who's part of our team here at the University of Tasmania. there's an estimate of 720 excess or premature deaths that are caused by wood heater emissions. And you can see when that's broken down by area, we've got the Australian Capital Territory sitting in there under Sydney, Adelaide, Tasmania and Melbourne. So even though we appreciate it's a huge problem in the ACT, it's actually a much bigger problem everywhere else, which is really quite amazing because I know you folks actually suffer hugely as well. So the point of that being that you're not alone, you're very much thought of in the bigger picture here. The thing is, though, that if we replace wood heaters with cleaner sources of heaters, so heat pumps, for example, and if we could do this with, say, around 50% of wood heaters, then we're actually saving a huge amount of money per year because deaths actually cost society a huge amount of money. So we're looking at around $1.6 billion per year if we cut wood heater use in half. So with that, I'm going to pass on to Sotiris, and he's going to tell you a lot more about these events in the ACT. So I will work out how to do that. I'm sorry, I am not used to I'm not used to WebEx. I'm so sorry. So give me.
Sotiris is already on the screen, so he can just talk.
Thanks very much. Great introduction by Pene and Sharon about the regulatory environment and the health effects of air pollution. It is a significant problem in ACT, and most of the time we enjoy clean air in Australian cities, in Canberra as well, but we do have persistent air pollution from particularly from wood heaters, as Sharon explained, during the winter months, and or even longer than that, nearly 4 or 5 months of the year. We have quite significant source of smoke from wood heaters, and occasionally we have bushfire smoke and also smoke from prescribed burning mainly during autumn and spring. So the air pollution is a problem in ACT. We know that even relatively moderate levels of air pollution can have significant effects on health. So we know that there is no safe level of air pollution for humans. So it is very important to reduce exposure, to minimize exposure, especially for people who have compromised health and existing respiratory or heart conditions, the elderly, young children, pregnant women. So these are people who are particularly at risk from air pollution. We know that air pollution can have acute effects on health, and that means exacerbation of asthma or other respiratory conditions, but also air pollution has long-term effects on health, and that includes systemic inflammation and knock-on effects on different parts of the human body, but also increased risk of mortality from cancer and other respiratory cardiovascular conditions. So therefore, very important, as I mentioned, to minimize exposure as much as we can. So we'll try to share some slides to refer specifically about wood heater smoke and a study we carried out in the ACT a couple of years ago. Let me see if I can do that. I think, Sharon, you need to stop sharing first.
Or Sharon, you could just move the slides forward, please.
Or if you can press the same button with the little arrow, I think that will help stop sharing. Okay, so this slide shows you what the problem is. So we can see the source of air pollution from wood heaters in neighborhoods, in residential areas. So It is the pollution from wood heaters is really emitted where people live and play and work. So it's very close to the sensitive receptors. And as you can see on the right-hand side, in winter days, especially early morning, late evening, we have the air pollution from wood heaters and other sources stagnates close to the ground. So this happens during cool days, and it happens mainly in places which have the topography that traps air pollution, like in a valley, like in Tigeranum, for example, is a classic example of a location where air pollution can linger for longer and stay close to the ground because of the topography. If we can move to the next slide, please. So this slide highlights the point that Pene made earlier, that in January 2020, we had the worst air quality in the world. That was because of the bushfires, the Black Summer bushfires had extreme levels of air pollution in the hundreds of maximum of PM 2.5, and as you can see here, the dramatic scenery, the red skies during that time. If we move to the next slide. So the point I would like to make is that obviously at that time we had extremely high air pollution levels, and in this graph on the left-hand side, you can see the concentration of PM 2.5, which are around 400, 500 during that period of time due to the smoke from the fires. But if we look at in the middle of the graph, you can see also that there are significantly high concentrations of air pollution, PM 2.5, during winter time. So this is what you see. The horizontal axis is a timeline, and it starts from January on the left-hand side and goes to the end of the year. So in the winter time, we had high concentration of air pollution, not as high as during the bushfires, but over a longer period of time. And if we blow up this part of the graph in the middle of the axis at the next click, then you can see that the concentration of PM 2.5 are quite high during the winter months and exceed the National Environmental Protection Measure level of 25 maximum meter cube, which is what is the limit value for 24-hour exposure. So you can see that during winter, July, August, there are a number of days which exceed this red horizontal line on the graph. So the next slide, please. So here you can see a screenshot from the ACT website where PM 2.5 levels are displayed on an hourly basis. So these are this is the similar or the same website that Pene presented earlier, but it shows hourly concentration of PM 2.5. And as you can see, the concentrations increase steeply during the evening and nighttime. And this is because of wood heater smoke. So during that time of the day, there's no traffic, but the concentrations, the levels of PM 2.5 are above 25 maximum meter cube. They're in the orange and red colors, and yellow and orange, which means that their quality is poor over that period of time. And we know that this kind of exposure, even over an hour or two, can trigger an asthma attack and trigger deterioration of an existing health condition. When we average the concentration, when we average the exposure over the whole day, then the levels are lower. But I would like to highlight that there are windows of time when the exposure to air pollution can be very significant because of these emissions from wood heaters in the neighborhoods affected. The next slide, please. So this is the study we published in the Medical Journal of Australia, which estimates the number of deaths associated, attributable to air pollution from wood heaters in ACT. Next slide, please. So we used data which come from 3 monitoring stations as Ben mentioned, there are 3 government-operated monitoring stations in ACT which measure continuously air pollution levels, and these are in Belcon, in the Fleury station, in the city center in Civic, and also in Tagiranon, the Monash station. You can see them on this map. It's worth stressing that this is insufficient monitoring for a city of the size of Canberra, and with the variability of the topography and also the emission sources and the population density. So we strongly encourage the ACT government to increase the density of the air quality monitoring network. And I'm pleased to say that we have just installed a new monitoring station at the University of Canberra campus at Bruce, in an inner northern suburbs of Canberra. So we have more monitoring data coming from the UC campus. But also there is an increasing network of low-cost sensors. Some of our listeners mentioned that they're using purple air sensors, low-cost sensors, which can be deployed in neighborhoods and monitor air quality on a continuous basis. They're not as reliable as the monitors that you can see on this picture, but they give a good indication of air pollution levels. So we collected the data over a number of years from these stations, and at the next slide, please, we can see that we estimated the number of deaths based on the data collected from the monitoring stations, their quality data, and also we used epidemiological evidence and population data from the ACT. And we estimated that the number of deaths, which are due to exposure to air pollution from wood heaters specifically, is between 11 and 63 deaths every year. The variability depends on the weather. So in colder years, we have higher use of wood heaters and more smoke in the air. And in warmer years, we have less use of wood heaters, hence less pollution and attributable deaths. So this is a very significant impact on mortality, very significant impact on public health, and also very significant impact on the economy. If we translate these deaths and the impact on the health service into dollars, we can estimate that the impact on the economies can be as much as $300 million every year due to wood heater smoke. So this is the most comprehensive study carried out in ACT in relation to wood heater smoke, and it indicates that the level of mortality attributable to wood heaters is similar to the mortality attributable to the smoke from the bushfires during the Black Summer, which was an extreme case. So we experience year on year, we experience a similar level of impact on mortality due to wood heater smoke in the ACT. Next slide, please. So as Ben mentioned, ACT is one of the first jurisdictions and a pioneering jurisdiction internationally, which has established the fundamental human right of a clean environment. I think this is something to be very proud of and very important legislation, very important piece of legislation for our region. And based on that, also there was the commitment of the ACT government to phase out wood heaters by 2045. And this ban on wood heaters cannot come soon enough to reduce the impacts on public health. So there are modern ways of electrify our houses. We know that, of course, many people love their wood heaters, and there are parallels with tobacco smoking in the past. But of course, we need to be aware that wood heaters cause a significant impact on public health, and there are other ways of heating our houses in wintertime. For example, heat pumps, reverse cycle air conditioning can provide a much cleaner and an affordable solution to heating and cooling the home environment in Canberra. So I believe this is my last slide. Thanks very much, Sharon, and very happy to take questions.
Okay, I think we're going to wait for questions right at the end of the presentation. So hopefully, unless there are some coming through right now, Philippa? Okay, we'll have some time for questions right at the end. If Jenny and Chris, you can share our slides again, and we'll pick up with our last segment, where we talk at you, and hopefully then you can talk back with us during the Q&A in about 10 minutes time. So in our last session, we're going to talk about reducing emissions from transport. So what are we talking about? We're talking about gases like carbon monoxide contained in vehicle exhaust, which is highly toxic. And when inhaled, these pollutants enter your bloodstream and can impact all of your organs. We have a very similar infographic coming up to the one that Sharon showed earlier, showing the impact on the human body. We also use the word emissions, of course, in relation to greenhouse gas emissions, things like carbon dioxide, which is one of the most prevalent greenhouse gases. Greenhouse gases act like a blanket or a greenhouse, trapping the heat from our sun near the surface, keeping the Earth's surface warmer than it would be without it. And they've been their biggest contributor to climate change, the changes in weather and temperature that we've been seeing worldwide. Just think about the extraordinary fires, the unprecedented fires that we're seeing in Spain and France right now. Our focus tonight is on air pollution in traffic exhaust, but obviously when we tackle that exhaust, we can also tackle climate change at the same time. So what are the health impacts? You've got a very similar infographic to the one shown before, showing how it impacts on every single organ in the body. Premature deaths in Australia have been estimated from tailpipe emissions, have been estimated at 11,000 per year, which is higher than the impact of skin cancer in Australia. And there's sufficient evidence that exposure to diesel exhaust causes lung cancer. Air pollution impacts are not evenly distributed, with children, the elderly, Indigenous Australians, and people with underlying disease facing higher risks. And children are particularly impacted by chronic exposure to traffic pollution, in part because they're closer to the ground level and the source of the exhaust, and also because they are still developing. Well, what can we do to minimise this impact? So next slide, please. We could choose to shift our travel options to public transport or active transport like walking or cycling instead of using our cars as much as possible. You could also take the idle off pledge. So anti-idling campaigns like the one that was launched earlier this year by Doctors for the Environment and Parents for Climate recognise that idling your engine can be the equivalent of smoking a cigarette around a child. And did you also know that idling for more than 10 seconds uses more fuel than turning off and then restarting your engine? The combined emissions from idling engines from around Australia are roughly equivalent to the emissions from over 1.5 million cars. Transitioning to electric vehicles is another strategy to combat air pollution and make a significant difference in the rate of global warming. So we have another Slido poll coming up. And if you don't already have an electric vehicle, we're interested to know what are the barriers to you getting one. And if you do have an EV, share what you think the barriers are. And again, short sentences work best, and you're very welcome to submit multiple answers. The federal government, and as you're doing the poll, I'll just keep talking. The federal government and the ACT government both have a role to play in managing transport emissions. We'll focus on the ACT tonight. Did you know that 1 in 20 registered vehicles in the ACT is now electric? And 1 in 4 new registrations in the last 12 months were electric vehicles. The ACT has undertaken a number of measures that aim to reduce the costs of purchasing and owning an EV. They include an emissions-based variable motor duty scheme, where the tax paid when you register a new vehicle or transfer the ownership of a used zero emissions vehicle is tied to its emissions, carbon dioxide emissions. This means you'll pay less tax to register a vehicle that is zero or low emissions, and more tax if you register a vehicle that has high emissions. An emissions-based registration scheme is also in place, where zero and low emissions vehicles have lower annual registration fees compared to higher emissions vehicles in the same weight range. And finally, from 1 July 2026, there are low interest loans for up to $20,000 for new and used EVs and EV charging infrastructure under the Sustainable Household Scheme. These loans can be used for other products that will reduce a home's environmental impact, including new and used electric motorbikes, and from September 2026, electric cargo bikes. So just looking at the poll results, people have talked about range anxiety, and that's, we acknowledge that at the Commission as being a source of anxiety. You know, will I run out of charge before I reach my my destination? People have talked about cost as well. Some are already saying they have an EV. And, you know, so there are a range of problems. If you're a renter or living in an apartment, you might have the, problems trying to charge your vehicle. And that's mentioned there by some of the people responding to the poll. So very interesting. We'll use that in our report as we write up what people are, what's holding you back from getting an electric vehicle. Now, the other option, of course, because there are these barriers to owning electric vehicles, and they might be insurmountable for some of us, but is to think about public and active transport, so using a bicycle or walking. As part of the consultation for the development of the new ACT climate change strategy, Canberrans communicated that they wanted an increased focus on public transport and active travel options to help us decrease our dependence on private cars. In addition, the ACT will not meet its climate change targets if it only focuses on accelerating the uptake of electric vehicles. So it has to be a combined effort. Helping the community to shift to choosing public or active transport where possible is also important. And there are, of course, other benefits if we do this, like less wear and tear on the roads, less particulate matter in the air, and health benefits from getting exercise as part of your daily commute. And this is our final Slido poll. What changes would make walking, cycling, or taking public transport easier for you or your community? No wood fire smoke, a good comment on not wanting to use your bicycle or walk outside if there's a lot of wood fire smoke going. Being able to take your e-bike onto public transport. Bus timetables. Pathways to semi-rural work sites. Having to take too many buses. And we'll have to look at Leon Arundel and the Canberra Times. free travel on buses. Really interesting suggestions coming through there. And good on the person who's already made some changes. Huge amounts of responses to this one. Oh, footpaths that are level, yeah. So if you tripping over uneven or broken footpaths, that's obviously a problem as well. Fantastic. Some people still typing their final results. Better tree canopy, really interesting results. Okay, well, as we people continue to type in their answers, this is actually the end of the formal part of the proceedings, and we can move to questions and answers. So Philippa, if you'd like to take back control and field some questions for the panel, that'd be appreciated.
Thanks for that, Penny. I just want to firstly say thank you to Professor Vardoulakis and Dr. Campbell for their session on health impacts and wood heater smoke. It's absolutely part of our review to increase the education that the general public in the ACT get on these health impacts. And it was also good to hear that Professor Vardoulakis supports the idea that the current air quality monitoring for the ACT is not adequate. If you remember back to the beginning of Penny's first presentation, where she gave the overview of the scope of the right to healthy environment, one of the procedural elements of the right to healthy environment is access to information. If there's not sufficient data, it could be seen as ACT government not fulfilling its obligations under the Human Rights Act. So there's a thought to start with. The questions have absolutely been flowing in. We've had some pre-submitted from emails and many, many more from the chat. So thank you everyone for engaging. I hope you found it as interesting as I have. Let's start with a question for Penny. This is a great question from John Penny. Does the Human Rights Commission provide a mechanism to force the government to ban wood burning in residential zones?
Not really. We just don't have that much power. What we can do is make recommendations, and that's the point of having this review, to make recommendations to government. And we're certainly looking at things like whether there are particular areas where no new wood heaters should be installed, and recommendations about not using wood heaters during inversion days and so on. We're trying to develop some interim steps that can be taken en route to this in principle commitment to phase out wood heaters by 2045. So that's the most we can do at the moment. And it's quite important for us to do this review because we can do other things like take complaints. Commissioner Karen Toohey takes human rights complaints, and she can certainly conciliate complaints involving right to a healthy environment issues. But at the moment, we have a litigation bar on the right to a healthy environment. It's the one right in our Act where you can't take a direct action to the Supreme Court or, use the right in litigation. So at the moment, our powers are purely recommendatory, whereas if the litigation bar was lifted, we have the power to intervene in court matters and make extensive submissions that are often very influential on what the court decides. And then, of course, you get a binding decision from the court. Philippa, have I missed out anything?
No, Penny, I think that's quite comprehensive. As I said, we will put together an FAQ resource and send that around. But yeah, there's been some great questions tonight. Sharon, I've got a question that I thought maybe you'd like to try and address. When Penny was doing her presentation on air quality monitoring, we asked the question, is the way the ACT government displaying the information easy to read for you? It might be great for people who love numbers and data. But Carolyn has asked the question, what value is good, fair, poor, etc.? Why are not the actual levels of pollutants provided in comparison with some apps? And I thought maybe you could talk to communication of data and making it accessible for all people.
Yeah, lovely. Thank you. And thanks, Caroline. That's a great question. I can start off by saying that those coloured categories are set by a body called NHealth, which is the Environmental Health Standing Committee. It's a jurisdictionally based representative group of mostly it's either environmental health managers or in some cases chief health officers from all the different jurisdictions. And so it's probably about 2 years ago now that that document was finalised. Previous to that, what had happened was that each state was doing air quality communication a little bit differently, and that sort of came unstuck in the 2019-20 bushfires because obviously smoke travelled across jurisdictional borders without knowing. Imagine that. And so when people were looking at air quality information in different states, they were actually getting quite different information, which was very confusing. And so there was a push to nationalise that, and almost all the states have now signed on to that. So that's a really pleasing step forward. Having said that, every state displays it a little bit differently because it's still run by state, usually Environmental Protection Agency bodies. So in some states you'll be able to see the number, and in some states you may not. But I don't know off my top of my head. In Canberra, Sotiris might know a little bit more. But I think if you do a deeper dive into individual stations, you'll be able to see that number. Sotiris, you might be able to chime in there and let me know if that's the case. But certainly in other states, you can see that number. In Tasmania, you can see the number. And so we actually don't have what you might call a linear response. So you would expect that at really low levels of air pollution exposure, you'd get low levels of health impact. It doesn't actually work like that. The biggest increase is at lower levels, and then it sort of flattens off as we get to really high levels. So we still need to be really aware when it changes from good to fair and from fair to poor, I think is the next category. We still need to be really aware of our health in that fair category. So hopefully that's answered your question, Caroline.
Thank you so much for that, Sharon. Now, Sotiris, this is an interesting one. Carolyn, I don't know if it's the same or a different Carolyn, has submitted via email that there was no ACT government reporting on the seriousness of the level of toxins in the air during late 2019 and early 2020. Her question is, how will the ACT rectify its poor response to air quality? And I'm going to draw an extrapolation that maybe Carolyn means in this regard, how will ACT rectify its reporting in those regards? Do you feel that the reporting in the ACT has improved or is relatively the same from 2019 and before those big bushfires?
Well, it has certainly improved. I believe before the Black Summer bushfires, the reporting was not real-time reporting, so we couldn't see the concentrations of the levels of PM2.5 at real time. Now there is a reporting of PM2.5. As Sharon mentioned, is color-coded, but I think we can get also the data and the concentrations in terms of microns meter cube. So if it is above 25 microns meter cube, then it's classified as poorer quality. So there's certainly improvement in the way air quality information is communicated. It's available online. one can argue that we can still improve further. As I mentioned earlier, we need more information, more monitoring signs. There are differences in air pollution in different locations. There are pockets, potentially hotspots of air pollution because of the location, because of the proximity to source of air pollution. So with only 3 monitoring stations in the whole ACT, it's very difficult to capture this variability. So more monitoring will be welcome. And of course, awareness, raising awareness of the health effects of air pollution, the source of air pollution in ACT. So quite often when we talk with the members of the public, they're surprised to hear that wood heaters are such a big, such an important contributor to air pollution in the ACT. So it comes as a surprise. And of course, we need to realize the importance of this source and of course, advocate for phasing out wood heaters. And of course, make sure that ACT government is accountable for this, and of course the honor the commitment of phasing out wood heaters by 2045, and that's that cannot, as I said earlier, this cannot come early enough.
Yeah, absolutely. We've got time for a few more questions. Dr. Dorothy Robinson via email submitted the question: do ACT residents have a right to be informed, for example, by a mandatory health warning on new wood heaters, maybe at point of sale? Penny, would you like to take that question?
Yeah, I mean, I think this is part of the right to information about the right to a healthy environment. And the Commission can certainly consider recommendations both at the point of sale for new wood heaters as well as for the wood that is burned in them about health risks. So that's a very valuable question to have asked. Thank you, Dr. Robinson.
And just to add to that, we know that the Commissioner for Sustainability and the Environment in the Burn Better Tonight report back in 2023 made the recommendation that there be mandatory labelling at point of sale. The Human Rights Commission is considering repeating that recommendation because we believe that, yes, it is worthwhile, and we believe that the ACT government has done similar things. So there's a precedent there. So yeah, thank you, Penny. Sharon, possibly another one. Jeddah on the chat asks, are there people in the community using air quality info to inform their day-to-day activities? Can you speak to generally how some people's lives are impacted daily from pollutants, particularly wood fire smoke?
Yeah, I most definitely can. We recently developed a bushfire smoke health plan, and part of that work, we had a number of people with lived experience of exposure both to wood heater smoke and to bushfire smoke. And they told us in detail about what they need to do. And these are people that had long-standing health issues or for some reason were part of the priority group that we're trying to reach in these circumstances. So these are things like I always need to have my medication on hand because I just don't know when one of those events is going to happen. They will curtail their social events in the evening because they don't want to be outside in winter because of the winter wood smoke. They're constantly checking apps and air quality information sources to make sure there's not something coming. And for some people, I think it really affects their ability to feel relaxed and comfortable in different times of the year. So smoke is smelling smoke is actually a very strong trigger for anxiety if you've been through a bushfire experience. So yeah, it's these people with the lived experience, they know what it does to their own body, and they will do anything they can to reduce that impact because they know how much it affects them. So absolutely, yes, Jetta, there's people that are making big sacrifices in the community to manage the way that their air and their environment exposes them.
That's truly like, you know, if it's not something that impacts on your own health, you're just completely invisible to it. So thank you for sharing that, and for trying to increase the volume of those people's voices, because they're absolutely the stories that need to be told as part of this education about that health impact. So thank you, Sharon.
I absolutely agree. I think it's one of the areas that if you're not affected, you just have absolutely no idea. And there's probably lots of different examples of that in different exposures all over the place. You know, there's people with MS, for example, that get that their condition is really triggered in very hot weather. And so in hot weather, they have to stay home in an air-conditioned location, and you wouldn't know because you can't see them. So there's some similarities there.
And I noticed Jetta's just responded saying that she's never going to burn another fire again. And
thank you, Jetta,
for taking action. That's an immediate win. That's fantastic. Good on you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, that's amazing. Shout out to Jetta. All right, we've got time. I'm wondering, so David submitted a question on the email saying, I'm wondering if licensing and registration for solid fuel burning heaters, so wood heaters, has been considered. Sotiris, are you able to answer whether that has been a regulatory lever used in the ACT or perhaps elsewhere?
You're on mute, Sotiris.
Thank you. Very good point. And that was actually one of the recommendations of the Commissioner for Sustainability and the Environment in the 2023 report, to have a register, up-to-date register of wood heaters in the ACT. It wasn't one of the recommendations which was taken up by the ACT government. I think it's a good recommendation. I think it's similar. We think of motor vehicles. They come with the registration that obviously allow us to know how many vehicles are on the road and what kind of fuel they're using. Currently, we have an idea about the number of wood heaters in the ACT. We believe that around 11% of the households are using them, but we have no certainty. So it will be important to have an up-to-date register that can also generate some. There can be a registration fee, which can also help finance wood heater phase-out schemes and replacement with the electric heating systems. So there are benefits to a registration system, and I think this has to be seriously considered.
Yeah, no, definitely. Yes, I actually remember reading that recommendation about registration. I hadn't considered the idea of it not just being a registration process, but a licensing process. And sorry, David, David raised that in his part of his question as well, about whether that income, if it was a licensing scheme, would be sufficient to potentially help fund the regulatory response. So yeah, thank you very much for the question, David, and thank you, Sotiris. I think we have time for possibly one more question. I wish we could get to all of them. There have been a number of questions about monitoring around summer gnats, and how those principles of the right to a healthy environment could apply to a Summer Nats event. That is a really interesting topic, which I know Penny and I are looking into as part of the review. I think, sorry, a lot of these questions have been answered in one way or another. So Penny, I might be asking you to repeat yourself a little bit with this one. But in an ideal world, all levels of government would have an obligation to prohibit the installation of new wood heaters when they know there is no safe standard that's sufficient to protect health. This is something that actually has come up a number of times in multiple different questions. Is there anything the ACT Human Rights Commission can do about this inequity, or is there anything individuals can do?
Yeah, so we can certainly make recommendations, as I said before, and we can stress government's obligations to use the precautionary principle. So that's very important. If there's no safe level, you act in a precautionary way and you don't allow potentially harmful activities to occur. And we can also talk about progressive achievement. So that's what we can do as the commission. And then what do we want to say about what individuals can do to put pressure on? Well, certainly write to your local member of the Legislative Assembly. We also have this petition process. You know, someone could start a petition on some of these issues and see if they can get a response from their politicians that way as well. One of the things we're keen to do here at the Commission is to do a lot more public education. I have a tiny little team. I have 3 people who work for me in the human rights side of the House, and I really would like to develop a human rights resource hub that's able to provide more information so that people can self-advocate using things like the right to a healthy environment.
Thanks, Penny. A number of people have asked us to provide a response in relation to Summer Nats. One particular question in relation to Summer Nats, which we can address very quickly, was what measurements are being taken around Summer Nats? And Penny, would you like me to answer that one?
Yes, thanks, Philippa. You've done all the research on this, so thank you.
I know the EPA have commissioned air quality monitoring around the Summer Nats event at the time the event was running on a number of different occasions, a few different years. I believe those reports are all available publicly. But there is no record. So Summer Nats is provided an environmental, well, not Summer Nats, sorry. EPIC is provided an environmental authorization to run those sorts of events. As Penny just mentioned, we only have 3 people in our team, and we are doing our best to get across all the topics as quickly as we can. But in terms of about whether those human rights principles apply, not whether they apply, but how they can apply to Summer Nats, and what obligations fall on the government to ensure they are making progressive realisation in relation to the right to a healthy environment and those sorts of events is just something we need to work through. We also may need to just have to wait for some case law to come through because it is still very an evolving right, particularly in the ACT.
The
I'm afraid
comments
that
just flashed up on the chat saying money talks, and yes, there's an economic benefit to Summer Nats, but we at the Commission certainly strongly believe that you need to take into account the impact on human health and on the healthy environment.
We are going to finish there. Thank you everyone for logging in tonight, for your questions, for your thoughtful participation with the polls and in the chat. I'd like to personally thank Tara, our ICT guru, Jenny and Chris at the Human Rights Commission, Adrian at the HEAL National Research Network, who have been very busy coordinating and working behind the scenes to ensure tonight runs as smoothly as possible. Thank you again to Professor Vardoulakis and Dr. Campbell for spending your valuable time to share your knowledge, expertise and insights with us. I can confirm that this session has been recorded or is being recorded, and we will make it available and we will put together a list of resources that were referred to as part of all the presentations, and we will provide that as well as best we can.
And thank you to Philippa, finally, for doing all the research in relation to this review and a lot of the heavy lifting on organising this particular event, which I've certainly enjoyed. And we love doing the Slido polls, which again was Philippa's idea. So thank you.
You're very welcome.
Thank you very much for
Thanks,
having
everyone.
us.
All right. Good night, everyone.
Good night.
Good night.